Personify is super lucky to have Lab as one of our strategic partners. And as we both focus on understanding human behavior and behavioral patterns, Lab works on a broader brand of strategies and audience interactions, and Personify is able to work with the personalization towards human behavior. So let's get into it. First, I'd like to introduce Harpreet Bushell. Harpreet has led Lab initiatives that have helped develop the group's capabilities to attract and nurture enterprise clients. Harpreet is developing the implementation of Lab's group strategy, helping major clients reshape their digital future within a dynamic market. We're also joined by Max Wiggins. Max has an impressive academic background in cognitive neuroscience and has used his skills to solve many complex commercial and societal challenges in digital at Verge, which is one of the companies within the Lab group. So let's start off with you, Harpreet. Can you start by telling me a little bit more about what Lab is and what you accomplish at Lab?
Yeah, sure. So Lab as a group was kind of formed a couple of years ago and started off as a bit more of a single technical agency. And the idea behind the group really was to have a kind of one-stop shop for clients where they could come in and find a mix of disciplines, which were very specialist in their own right and not diluted by any sense, and kind of set them up for either complex challenges, reimagining their business, or kind of being very forward facing for what they need to accomplish. So very broadly in terms of those disciplines, what sits under that is technical agency, so digital enablement of the strategy and bigger picture, digital marketing, so kind of that reach of how we reach people, how we convert them, how we keep them engaged, communications in terms of how that works in terms of tone of voice, proposition, all that things that go into a brand and how they communicate with their audiences, and the creative aspect. So what is the emotional aspects of how what the science can't get to, just the beauty of it, the kind of irrational, really falling in love with a brand or a design or the experience, and how that plays into a bit more experiential, so in terms of 3D rendering, experiential, all those aspects. But what's really core to that, and where kind of Max very much sits, is the behavioral science unit of that hub. So really looking at, I think everyone has kind of been going on about putting humans back into tech for about 5 years. And that kind of goes the other way of understanding human experience or kind of nudges and the worst stuff in terms of dark patterns. But how we're looking at it is a lot more from an academic discipline of how can we understand the aesthetics, the comms, the softer, the tech, but also pull it into really understanding the psychology of users and how we overlay that on kind of data, insights, trends to really have stuff that's applicable and isn't just like this massive chasm from data to actionable insights.
Yeah, so it sort of lies at the cross section between the soft skills and the harder skills, and how can those two play together to create the best experience?
Yeah, exactly that.
That's amazing. Makes a ton of sense. So Max, can you tell us a little bit about your background in cognitive neuroscience and how that brought you to Lab?
Yeah, sure. Quite unexpectedly, I was sort of brought to Lab, had a chat a couple of years ago with someone who was working here, and I wasn't even aware of this world of applying psychology and neuroscience to marketing or digital. It turns out probably because it was in its infancy, this area, and over time, more and more agencies, as Harpreet touched on, are doing this, trying to look at how human behavior is so important in the digital sense. And just like any other sort of channel, face-to-face meetings, in shopper interactions, digital is another platform or vehicle where we can really understand human behavior. And over time, that's only increasing as more people come online, as there's different ways of sort of interacting, communicating online. So my background is, as you've touched on, cognitive neuroscience and psychology. So I sort of specialized in memory specifically. So not just how do we recall things, but are we actually encoding them in the first place? Because if they're not going into our heads, they're not going to stay there, and then we're not going to recall them. So a lot of the work me and the team do look at how can we keep people engaged, how can we serve them the right content which is super relevant and salient to them, and therefore enables them to recall it with ease.
So can you give us a little bit of a sneak preview into what is important in terms of having people really absorb something so that they're able to recall it later?
Yeah, it's going to be a really annoying answer because it really depends on the person. Okay. And I think that's a lot of the work we're doing is trying to understand how someone behaves and how they interact with the world online. So once you can understand their kind of psychological traits, you can understand a bit about how they'll think and approach things. And as a result, you can personalize experiences online to best serve their needs. So we're really interested in helping people online, helping them do the things they want to do and achieve it in the best way. So if I know that I'm a person who's quite, for example, rational, I like things in a logical order, we will try and infer that from the way someone's interacting online and not just promote certain products which are typically rational. We're not interested in the products. It would be serving them the experience which aligns with how they interact in the world. And I think that's we're trying to solve a different problem, not just resurfacing product or service personalization, but actually trying to deliver an experience which feels most natural to that person.
Right, that makes a ton of sense. And so with your background in cognitive neuroscience, was there a specific spark or piece of inspiration that brought you into the into lab?
It's a good question. No, it probably took quite a while to actually find my feet and sort of understand the whole area, because I think it's at the start you have to understand digital and understand personalization, users experience, user journeys. I think one of the amazing things with lab is I get to work with dev technical team and also work with UI and UX team and creatives and strategists. So we have a kind of floating role there where we're looking at where we can best implement behavioral science, only where appropriate. Sometimes you don't fix what isn't broken, but I think for us it's just trying to lend that understanding of how understanding the trait of the user, understanding how they perceive the world, and therefore reinforcing some things back. And that's often through what we know about behavioral science and nudge theory, playing to particular biases that they might be used to, but also in language as well. So serving the right language back to them in a way which is really resonating, because it all kind of underlies the mantra that if something is really salient to the way that I'm thinking, I'm going to respond to it positively, I'm going to understand it quickly, and I'm going to want to engage with it. And that's really what we're trying to do, especially with personalization.
I think a lot of it in terms of what we do is like challenging the norms as well, because a lot of when it comes to digital is like we've always done it this way, and you guys at Personify will know this more than ever, but we've all sat in those meetings where you've developed those typical marketing personas, and they're not so much on what we know, they're on anecdotal stuff. And like Max said, the drivers of those behaviors can be completely different to the makeup of who you are and what you typically buy. And past behavior, as we know from psychology, is not a great indicator of future behavior. So the idea that typically we create personas based on these and attributes of a person rather than them behaviorally, and then use past behavior as an indication, is completely flawed.
Yeah, I saw a great example the other day. You've probably all heard of it, but it's like Prince Charles, born in 1949, very wealthy, lives in a castle, and then same demographics, Ozzy Osbourne. They're incredibly different people, but from a demographic point of view, you'd say they're the same. And what we're doing at Verge and at Lab Group is trying to go deeper and actually not just understand that, but the traits, the personality, the behaviors which they engage with. Because once you know that stuff, then you can really understand your customers, and that has a trickle down effect. You can build that into design, into the experience. So that's kind of what we're involved with.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Harpreet. That's the same philosophy that we're going after at Personify. And instead of looking at demographic information, really taking it a step further and truly understanding someone's behavior and getting that to get to know them and make their experience online better. Fantastic. And so in a world without understanding behavioral neuroscience, what might companies be getting wrong in trying to personalize to their customers? I think we've touched on this a little bit, but is there any more that we can sort of expand upon that?
Harpreet, do you want to take it or shall I?
You go first.
Okay. I think really it's following the status quo, probably, of personalization. So resurfacing things that they've customers quite explicitly indicated they're interested in. So I'm shopping online, I click on a red jumper, suddenly red t-shirt or another jumper is personalized back to me. I think that's fine, but in a world where marginal gains are so important, especially on digital, companies can go a little further and try and work out not just what they're clicking explicitly, but some of the more implicit behaviors. How did they find that product? Did they use the search bar, or did they scroll for 10 minutes at different items going back and forth, back and forth? Did they click on suggested items quite a lot? Because that might indicate to you they quite like, inspiration. And it's building up that knowledge, which you can then use in personalization to try and deliver not just the product, but the right experience, which might be relevant for that person.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think just because I've already kind of touched on the demographics and the personas, I think also sometimes it's relying on the data a bit too much and just not thinking about what someone's exhibiting behaviorally in that session. Like, similar to Max, I'm very rational, but I can also be massively impulsive. And the rational decisions are probably the needs, but the kind of want and what I desire, that big impulsive buy is probably going to happen without much thought because I'm in a good mood or I've had a drink. And you can see that from like how I would be navigating a website and kind of the things that I'm looking at, those kind of price points. So I think just understanding those kind of behaviors and more data points, like Max said, like what have I searched for, what are the other things I'm looking at, rather than just going, someone's bought this and they're most likely to buy that, because some of that is can be very different. And also people do tend to shop for themselves or for other people, for gifting, the rest of it. Sometimes you can very much skew that data. I always feel like Amazon's trying to sell me something I completely don't need, and probably because most often I'm buying gifts on there, so their makeup of me is like completely irrational, of like the kind of person that I'm generally buying for is completely different to what I'm buying for myself.
Yeah. Just to touch on that, if I can, it's really a point, Harpreet, like taking on all those different data points, because what you can do as well is start adding data points which you think will either confirm or deny type of person. So, if they're always shopping late at night, for example, on a Friday, they might have had a drink and be on the train back buying something from Amazon, I don't know, whatever, to give them a little treat in the morning. I think you can build that into your understanding, and those little indicators help you better understand a person. And then as a result, you can try and work out what they're really after and make that experience as seamless as possible for them, or a bit more, have a bit more friction in there if that's what they want.
At Personify, we follow a very similar philosophy and try and identify what a person's mission is on that particular day. So it's not who are you, what do you always like to buy? It's who are you, what are you looking to buy today? Or what are you looking for in your browsing today? So really identifying and understanding that people change, as you said, Harpreet. We're not the same every minute of every day.
Yeah, context is so important, and that's the main thing. The example I always give is some people might have higher or lower conscientiousness, but if someone's revising for an exam, they're going to be more conscientious no matter what. So the task or the mission, as you say, what they're trying to do is super important, and the interaction between how they normally behave compared to that, super important to understand.
I think also like the question you asked earlier about mistakes, like Max did a lot of research into post-purchase regret. And the other thing is we want to personalize for good and to maximize basket value of people purchasing. But quite often, if we're pushing them in a way that we don't understand, what you actually face with is like more regret post-purchase, more returns. And that to you as a business and your whole life cycle of understanding the customer journey is a lot more expensive. So understanding, like going back to the data points, understanding how your actions play into the whole customer journey and their overall experience with you as a brand, rather than just thinking, how in this journey can we maximize basket value?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Great. So I think we've touched a little bit on this as well, but just want to get sort of a full picture of how we think applying psychology can enhance personalization. So what is it specifically about applying psychology that helps us to personalize?
I think having an understanding of psychology and the way someone thinks and approaches problems and interacts with the world is super important, because then that gives you a framework for thinking about how you can personalize the experience. So at Lab, we think about 5-factor model of personality, sometimes called OCEAN. So openness to new experiences, neuroticism, extroversion, agreeableness, and I said it in the wrong order there. Neuroticism, conscientiousness. That's just a framework which we use, and all of these personality traits are on a scale. They're constantly moving up and down depending on the context. Different people have quite fixed sort of parameters. Just taking that psychological model of someone's personality, we can start to map and understand how different consumers or different customer segments might behave on a journey. Are they more conscientious, looking for a product, looking for the search bar, looking for deals, or do they like it when you suggest new content? Do they like it when we say this similar offer, you know, and that would indicate they're more open to new experiences. And having this framework from psychology, it just helps you, it just gives you a bit of a better understanding of the consumer. Once you have that understanding, you can then apply what you know about that to try and, you know, nudge them along the journey or nudge them in a particular way which best serves their interests.
And I think some of this is so easy applied into old school marketing and advertising in terms of psychology used to play a part, but we haven't crossed it over into digital well. And some of those, one of my favorite examples is the Betty Crocker. So when they launched the ready-made cakes in the 50s, the uptake was really low, and then they applied a bit more of a academic rigor to it and looked at focus groups, and it was because they didn't feel like they had any ownership in making that cake, because you just added water, you baked it. It was kind of embarrassing to give to people when they came around because you didn't feel like you'd put in any effort. And then all they did was you had to add an egg into the mix. So adding one more step made people feel like they involved it. There was some kind of pride in delivering it up. And it's very similar to kind of the IKEA effect. If you've made that furniture, you attribute more value to it. And it's understanding those different factors into how humans attribute value, and where that kind of the wider stuff comes that brands are looking for, like brand loyalty and ownership of the products and the things they buy.
Super interesting, and definitely shows how adding behavioral elements into every type of marketing and advertising is going to be extremely important and helpful in targeting the right customers in the right way. We're running up on time here, so I'm wondering if either of you have any last words that you wanted to say regarding our behavioral personalization topic today.
Probably one last one from me. I think as well, with regards to personalization, it's a very rational thing. If someone is shown to do this, serve this. Where psychology can help is that humans are irrational. We don't do things for the reasons we think. We say we do something, and then afterwards we post-rationalize and go, oh no, I definitely made that decision because I was feeling like eating a salad today. It's not true. 95% of the time there's different influences which we're not aware of. Psychology can really help drill down into that. You know, the rational idea for when there was price comparison sites was just, yeah, serve people all the options as quickly as possible because that's what they want. Turns out people didn't believe it. So what they added in was a loading wheel for 5 seconds to make people think, no, this company's searching, it's actually doing the due diligence to find stuff. And then engagement massively increased. So I think it's little tricks like that where psychology can really help understand the irrational side of personalization and human behavior.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's being able to implement all that and having tools like Personify where you can also test and learn. So kind of combining the irrational and then testing, modifying, and just being able to have that flexibility to really try out different things and make sure that all those factors are in play, and you're treating people in the right way, and looking at in terms of like the overall life cycle of the customer over their journey and all the different aspects, rather than just kind of measuring your web experience for users.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today on this episode of Who Ate All the Cookies.
Brilliant. Thanks for having us.